no loyalty there. There's no commitment there. And then you have the people of Judah. Those are those who are part of the family of God. Those are the saved folks. Again, those are the ones who are saved. Again, there's no question about it. They are saved. Again, they are part of the divine family of God. But then you have the people. Those are the individuals who are totally surrendered and submitted to Jesus Christ, and they're willing to follow him wherever he goes. And then finally you got Absalom. Absalom, we are told, again, he was just simply stuck on himself. Again, he had it all going. Again, he had the looks, he has the charisma, but he was just stuck on himself. And if you will, Absalom represents the self. Again, the fleshly person. And so we have the parties involved. Then we have the place of the events. Again, we are told that in verse 8, then the king arose and sat in the gate. Now, please understand, he's not in Jerusalem. David had to flee Jerusalem. David is, in fact, in a place called Hananaim, or Mahanaim. It's across the river of Jordan, north of Jerusalem, probably about 50 miles north of Jerusalem. Again, it takes a good 2 to 3 days in order to get from Jerusalem to Mahanaim. Mahanaim, we are first introduced to that particular location in the book of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 32, when Jacob flees from his uncle Laban, he approaches the river of Jordan, and there, before he crosses over, he camps overnight. And the Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 32 that there the angels of God met him. Yes, sir. See, again, Jacob, he knew that he was going back for trouble because he had fled from his brother Esau, who was out to kill him. And so before he crossed over, he goes to a place, and the angels of God meet him. And Jacob says, this is truly the camp of God. Again, and so again, a few hundred years later, David, as he flees from Jerusalem, as he flees from Absalom, he has to cross over Jordan, and he goes to, again, the same place, Mahanaim. At this time, Mahanaim is a Levitical city. Again, it is a city occupied by the Levites, and as such, it has now become a city of refuge. And if you will, there's a sermon in there for you somewhere. Again, during those times of despair, during times of hardships, when, again, everything is going wrong for you, who do you run to? Is there a city of refuge where you can run to? Again, when there are those who are out to get you, who do you run to? Do you run to, again, the psychiatrist? Do you run to again, your friends? Do you run into, again, all these doctors and so forth? Or do you have, again, a camp of God to run to? Mahanaim. Again, he runs to a place where he knows where he can find, again, the help of the Lord. And then, of course, we have the city of Jerusalem that has been forsaken by David because he had to flee. That's where the capital city is. That's where his throne is. Again, David is 50 miles away. Absalom had occupied the throne briefly, but now he's dead. And so we have in Jerusalem the place of the capital of Israel where the elders of Jerusalem are residing. And so again, as we go back to our text, again, we are told, then the king arose and sat in the gate. And they told unto all the people, saying, behold, the king doth sit in the gate. And all the people came before the king, for Israel had fled, every man to his tent. Let me give you a picture of Israel, what's going on here. We see in verse 8, it tells us for Israel. And that's not those who were loyal to David. Those were those who rebelled against David. For Israel had fled every man to his tent. And so what we see is that this particular point in Israel's history, it is a rebellious time. The 11 tribes of Israel has rebelled against their king. The same king that had rescued them earlier, the same king that had defeated the Philistines, Israel has now rebelled against the king. Not only was it a rebellious time, as we continue reading again, we are told again in verse 9, and all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel. The people were at strife. It was not only a rebellious time, but it was a riotous time. Again, there was infighting still going on. Even though the civil war was over, again, there was, again, civil unrest. Again, a state of rioting had occurred. Again, as one group, again, fought against the other group. As they debated back and forth, what are we going to do? Again, it was a riotous time. We are told in verse 9, as they continued, the king saved us out of the hand of our enemies and delivered us out of the hand of the Philistines. What we see here again, it is a time of reflection. As they argue back and forth what we need to do, what we ought to do, they began to reflect upon what David had done for them. It was a time of reflection. And finally, we see again, we are told in verse 9, the last part of verse 9, and now he, David, is fled out of the land. It was a time of rejection. They reflect upon their plight. They reflect upon the fact that, again, that they have just gone through a civil war. Again, there's the nation's in a state of chaos, and they recognize that they need some help. They recognize, again, that in order to get out of this thing, they need somebody on the throne. And so as they reflect upon what we're going to do, they have to come to grips with the fact they have to acknowledge that they have rejected David. David was appointed king. He was anointed king by God. They rejected him. It was a time of rejection. But finally, again, we see in verse 10, and Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Again, not only was it a rebellious time in Israel's history, not only was it a riotous time in Israel's history, not only was it a time of reflection and rejection, but it was a rulerless time. They had no ruler. There was no one sitting on the throne of Jerusalem. Why? Because the one that they had chose was now dead. The one that they decided to embrace couldn't do anything for him because he was dead. It was a rulerless time. And saints of God, you got to understand, this is not the first time that Israel had found themselves in a position where they were rulerless. Because the Bible tells us in Judges, in the last chapter of Judges, the last verse, it tells us there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And so because there was no king, because there was no ruler, again, Israel was in a state where everybody was free to do whatever they wanted to do. It was a time of relative morality. Again, what you think is right, what it feels good to you, if it's good to you, you go ahead and do it. Relative morality. Now, there's a problem in living in a culture of relative morality. And the problem is that our behavior becomes less than desirable. The behavior of Israel began to, again, deteriorate to the point of where literally it had become reproachful and reprehensible in the eyes of God. And I suggest to you again that the behavior of the people could be traced back to what we see in chapter 12. Chapter 12 sets the stage for the behavior of what we see in Israel. What happened in chapter 12? David, after committing adultery with Bathsheba and having gotten caught in his sin, God confronted him. But God not only confronted him, God forgave him, and God had mercy, and God showed grace to David. But see, again, what happened now that has set a trend for everybody else to follow. They saw where God had grace on David, and as a result, I suggest to you that people took advantage of the grace of God, and for them, grace became a license to sin. In the book of Jude, Jude tells in the first verse, again, that he speaks of those who would come to deceive the people of God, and he tells that they would turn the grace of God into lasciviousness.